we're starting by chapter 3.
Yeah.
We closed off by chapter 2, the last one, eh? Conclusion there. So, but before we start by chapter 3, last time we actually spoke about all the different plates that shifted, and the things that changed, and we proved the world flood and everything, and we discussed the whole story about the Garden of Eden and the rivers that flow out of it, and we started and we thought that was the river, remember?
Yeah.
And at the end, I don't think I came to the conclusion. I read the piece, but I didn't show, actually, on the map, I didn't show that the rivers from the Garden of Eden was actually those rivers coming through there, coming down there, that one, and not this one.
Oh, not that one.
Not that one. This one is lying underneath, what is that, the Red Sea?
Okay.
Okay? That was because of the plates that shifted. You can't see it. That's why that river disappeared. It's lying underneath there. But it's coming out here on the top of South Africa, right on top of South Africa, of Africa, not South Africa, of Africa, right on the top. It's coming out. And those are the rivers, one of the one side and one of the other side of the Garden of Eden. That is where the rivers is flowing. Not that one, but coming down, because that is the gold that I got, all the descriptions and everything, and the Havala is lying there, and everything. It's that river that they were talking about. Right. So we're going on with chapter 3. And you know, I think I'm working harder than all the students that must just go and work out the home study exercises. But you know, I enjoy it so much. Every time you go through a thing, you learn more.
You learn more, yeah.
And you actually find out that you don't know a lot. Let's start. Abram and his kinsmen.
Yeah.
Abram was an Aramean, and his father was homeless. And went to Egypt with a small company and lived there until they became great, powerful and numerous nation. That you can read in Deuteronomy 26 verse 5. Arameans was seen as nomads in records as early as 2700 before Christ. They followed the nomadic Amorites in settling in Mari. Now we're starting again with maps. On the Euphrates, they are not only identified as one particular territory, the term was used to refer to an important Semitic group of people living as scattered tribes throughout Syria and Mesopotamia. Now come we have a look a bit. If we go again, we're still in that area.
Okay.
We still in that top area. So those rivers was flowing there, going up there. Okay. So we're still in that area. This it must just work a little bit faster. Where are that cursor? Okay. Am I in the right area? Mesopotamia. You see this? Yeah, that one down. Now here we look at Mesopotamia, between the rivers. Mesopotamia was here between the rivers. This is upper Mesopotamia, this is lower Mesopotamia. This is modern day Syria. There's Mari we spoke about now. That's the kingdom of Mari. There's the Euphrates river, the Euphrates. There is the Tigris, going down there. Okay, I will see the others we're going to mention everywhere, but that is the main place we're going to speak about now. The lower Mesopotamia, upper Mesopotamia. Okay. But the main one we mentioned now was right here. The kingdom of Mari. There's Nahor. Mari is lying actually more there. But that whole area was the kingdom of Mari. Right on top there. Aram, the father of Abram, was listed as a son of Shem in Genesis 10 verse 21 and further. The name of Aram referred to the area of Haran, which is in close relation with the Israelite patriarchs. Lower Mesopotamia at the time of Abram. Semitic kings of Akkad ruled Mesopotamia during the Old Akkadian period 2360 to 2180 before Christ. The Amorites pushed into Upper Mesopotamia, that's the upper side, from the Arabian desert. Guti power was eventually broken in Lower Mesopotamia, the one at the bottom of the blue line. Under the third dynasty of Ur, 2060 to 1950 before Christ, this allowed the development of the Sumerian culture. The founder of the third dynasty of Ur was Ur-Nammu, and he rebuilt the walls of Ur, the Zagharat, the palace, and numerous public buildings. The record of the building of the Zagharat has been recovered in the stele of Ur-Nammu. Now, if you remember, we also dealt with that already. There's the stela. Wait, one more. Mesopotamia, another one. There's the stela. Remember we did it in the earlier chapter? That's the stela. We did there. Go up again. We can look there at the nicely. That is the Nile River, and then you can see the Mesopotamia, Asia Minor, the Tigris and everything. You can see what has happened there. They'll be back in the map we had. The alternating rule of the Sumerians and Semitic Akkadians in Mesopotamia resulted in a mixing of cultures. Now, as we go through, you will find out how many mixture of cultures came into the Israel nation. But at the end, they got the pure, if you think about it, there is a pure line still somewhere in the Israelites. Because in Revelation, God said there will be 144,000, 12,000 of each nation. So somewhere the bloodline is still pure and will come through. Just think about it. They are very mixed, you will find out, but there somewhere is still pure lines. Just to think about it. From before Christ they mixed already, but somewhere there is still pure lines, and they, I know that there are some of the priests is already tested in Jerusalem. Yes, that is pure. Yeah. The temple, what I call it? The temple, they got a name for it now that they built the temple, everything is built already. They got them already tested, the priests of the new temple. The Sumerian language was replaced by the Semitic, but some elements of the Sumerian culture survived. With the fall of the third dynasty of Ur to Elamites from the east and about 1950 before Christ, Sumerian power, which had lasted more than 1,500 years, came to an end. It's a long time, right? But it came to an end. The cities of Sumer, Lashan and Ur was conquered by the Elamites. Ibisen, king of Ur, was taken into captivity. In the following period of power, city-states of Kish, Erech, Babylon, Lashan, Ishuk, and Lachash. Look here. They are all here at the bottom. Here. Erech, Lashan, Ur, there, and Lachash. They're all here together. And that's Kish, the only one is a bit higher. That's Kish. All that lower Mesopotamia. All together there. With a continuous warfare. The people of northwestern Mesopotamia and northern Syria were referred to in cuneiform text in Amura, the westerners. Genesis 11 verse 31 states that Abram's father took his family and some of his relatives from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan. They came unto Haran and dwelt there. Haran became Abram's country and the land of kindred, and his father's house in Genesis 24 verse 4 to 7. Can we go a bit down? There's Earth. Kevin, am I going too slow? Are we going to Hammurabi law? Before we go there, I just want to show you where's Haran. I could have showed you the top one also. Haran is here, the same pattern, but it's here up and top there. So they took his people and he went totally on top.
Okay,
And right on top there, there's Haran coming out there. And then only you will see that Haran was a bit south of Fallujah, and there to the west was Haran. So just a little bit this side was Haran, but it was right on top here. They totally went onto the top. Okay, but I need to go back to the top one, to there. Okay. Now the age of Hammurabi. Remember we spoke about this law with the previous chapter. Mesopotamia has struggled with turmoil for 2.5 centuries. The Hammurabi, the sixth king of the first dynasty of Babylon, defeated the king of Lasha and reigned 42 years over Babylon. Thus overthrowing Elamite power in Sumer, and his victory marked the end of ancient Sumer. So there, Sumer is also written off. By the 18th century, the people who had spoken the Sumerian language were practically extinct. And the Semites were in complete control. However, much of the culture was still predominantly Sumerian in form of content.
Okay.
With the rise of Babylon, the god of the city, Marduk, became the great deity of Babylon. So we see the deity, so Marduk became a great deity of Babylon. Hammurabi was able to uniform the area in the name of Marduk after long wars against the Alawi in the east, Assyrians in the north, and the Amorite king in Mari to the north of the middle Euphrates. Now I showed you Mari was right on top there, ne? Okay, right on top. The Epic of Gilgamesh was recording a lasting form of the creation epic which had been handed down for generations, which recited at the New Year's feast in Marduk. You remember that we dealt with in chapter 2? We discussed the whole thing about that. The majority of Hammurabi's laws related on economic life and the regulation of commerce. There, you got it. A famous law came with development by the Hammurabi and was curved on a great slab. That was the law. The code divides men into 3 classes now. I think we had it also in the chapter 2, but let's just see again. That was the upper, the commoner and the slave. The retribution for crimes depending on the class of the man involved. If a noble broke a bone of another nobleman, the offender's bone was to be broken. If a noble destroyed the eye of a commoner or broke his bone, the offender was to pay 1 mina of silver. If a man destroyed the eye of a nobleman's slave or broke the bone of a nobleman's slave, he was to pay 1/2 his value. Just think if we work today in that way, eh? Wouldn't it be nice? If somebody broke my bone, I will break his bone. Yeah. So yeah. This thing is working slow, but it's working. So let's go Abraham at Haran. Now remember Haran is here on top. We're going back there on top. Remember it's here. Haran is there on top. Remember? There. You're back there on top on the map. Tables uncovered in Mari, south of Haran. Mari is the place here. Remember? Mari is there. There's Haran. Mention several towns in the region with names which are the same as or similar to those of Abram's relatives. Haran was the name of the brother of Abram, as well as the name of the city to which Abram moved during his journey to Canaan. Mari was a flourishing city in the 19th and 18th century before Christ. The city Nahor is also mentioned. Nahor is that one there, just bottom of, there's Nahor. Is also mentioned. The name is given in the Bible for the grandfather of Abraham and also his brother in Genesis 11 verse 24 and 26. The town of Saruga, let's see, Saruga is also here. The town of Saruga there, to the west of Haran was Saruga, to this side was Saruga. Town of Saruga, which was the west of Haran, is the same name as Serach, grandfather of Terah, in Genesis 11 verse 21. South of Haran was the town of Pelicha, that's the one just going down that arrow, a name similar to Abraham's ancestor Peleg, in Genesis 11 verse 16. There are names of Abraham's ancestors which suggest that the land of Haran was much more closely associated with Abraham's background than was the land of Ur in lower Mesopotamia. Abraham's ancestors must have been more deeply rooted in the area than is implied by the biblical references in Terah stopping at Haran's in a journey from Ur to Canaan. So they reckon instead of there at the bottom, he was more in the top part. Abraham. Yeah, the top. Abraham was more in the top part.
And is on that map is where is it also where Canaan is, or it's not on this one?
Let's see. We're gonna go to Canaan. We're gonna see where Canaan is. Okay. I don't want to get up to you're gonna see exactly. The next one is the land of Canaan. We're gonna go on to that. You will see where's Canaan. Okay. You will see where. Just keep this is when you look at the map. This is on this side, and then you've got the Canaan lying in front there, and that is a cut there. So you will get to Canaan. Okay. Nomadic tribes were not tied to one area. Therefore, the biblical account of Terah's moving his family from Ur to Haran, where ancestors had established villages and cities, is not unreasonable. Abraham's actions reflected the custom of cultures in Upper Mesopotamia and are more easily understood in the light of them. The land of Canaan. Okay, now we come there. Okay. Okay. And be still. Yeah. You see? That's the Red Sea. The Dead Sea is right there on top. You see? That's the Persian Gulf. Okay? That's the Mediterranean Sea. But they speak such a lot about. That's the Gulf of Aden there. But we're still there on top. We're still by the same place. Now, as you see, the whole Bible is actually working around that area.
Yeah.
If you think about it, everything in the Old Testament so far is playing around that area. All that area, and they're coming later on that area and coming around that area. If you can say it in that. Okay, now make it a little bit bigger. Make it a little bit bigger at the end. Okay. Okay, let's see. The Canaanite seems to have been a Horite word and may have meant land of the re-purple. The Greek had the name Phoenicia, a Greek word meaning purple. The Canaanites in Syria who settled along the east coast of the Mediterranean made textile due from Muricus. It's a shellfish yield purple dye. This Muricus. I hope I pronounced it right. This fish name. I'm not so sure. Muricus. The Canaanites in Syria who settled along the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea, okay, that's what I said. Trade routes went through Canaan, which linked the area with the major empires of the day and caused the Israelites to be in the midst of world affairs. Since Canaan reached the great civilizations of Mesopotamia, Asia and Egypt, many of the cultural developments from those advanced civilizations was transmitted through the Canaanites to the Israelites. Now let's see. go to Canaan. Canaan. You see, there was we were now just now. There's the Euphrates and the Tigris. There is Canaan. You see, next to the sea here. There's the Lachish, Giza, Shechem, Jerusalem, Jericho is all here next to the sea. See, that's Canaan.
Yeah.
Okay. Major cities in Canaan. The word Bible, as we had it with the interpretation of the Bible, we know about was a Greek, the word Bible, which in Greek means book. We had it with the interpretation of the Bible. Was delivered from the name of the Syrian city, Byblos. Remember?
Yeah.
In addition to the alphabet, the Israelites borrowed from the from the Canaanites, literary styles which appear in the Old Testament. Canaanite artists and architects influenced Israelite architecture and culture. Likewise, Canaanite religious practices influenced the Israelites to commit adultery. There we go. Adultery. There we go. Can we get to the next picture? Yeah. The Hittites live in Judean hills. In Numbers 13 verse 29. They settled far to the north in Anatolia, but had extended southward to the northern part of Syria. Ephron, the Hittites sold the burial ground, which was situated near Hebron, to Abram. Remember, Abram had a ground that was being bought to be buried in. Genesis 23 verse 8 till 10 and 25 verse 9. Abram referred to himself as a foreigner and a settler in the land of Canaan, while the Hittites were natives to the area and owned the land. Esau, listen nicely, Esau married the daughters of the Hittite woman as wives. Esau married the daughter of Hittite woman as wives. You can actually say daughters. Now listen, daughters, so it's not one wife. Esau married daughters of Hittite women as wives. He had more than one Hittite wife.
Yeah.
The daughters of the land. So there we see the first other culture that came in, that I mentioned. Genesis 27 verse 46 and 28 verse 1. The Hittite Amalek, now you know Amalek, was a contemporary of David.
Yeah.
1 Samuel 26 verse 6. As was Ura, the husband of Bathsheba. 2 Samuel 11 verse 3 and 15 verse 9 to 10 and 23 verse 29. The Hittites reside in the southern part of Canaan in the area of Hebron and Beersheba. The name of the 14th century ruler of Jerusalem, the Jebusite center, appears in Amarna letters and means servant of Hepa, which is reference to the Hurrian mother goddess. Now before we go to the goddess, we first look at this map. It's quite interesting because this is the mountain part, hill country of Jordan. Was total wilderness of Judea. There's Hebron, Bethlehem, Jerusalem, and there's the Dead Sea. That was the whole wilderness of Judea where they actually lived. If you think about it, do you want to live in a wilderness? But that was actually a beautiful area at that time. And that is where they lived. Very nice area. Before all the shifting, the plates shift, and we messed up a lot of things. Then we got the goddess, the mother goddess. Oops, that's the fast. There, that was the mother goddess of the Huran, mother goddess we spoke about. And Genesis 34 verse 2 connects Hamor, the Hivite, direct with Shechem. Gibeon was a Havite center, John 9 verse 7 and 11 verse 19. The biblical names, Jebusites, Havites and Horites are reference to the Hurrians, Genesis 15 verse 21 and 36 verse 2 and 20. You know, it's so strange. I'm speaking Afrikaans, so pronouncing the words in English is a bit different. It's a bit different from the Afrikaans to English, so please excuse that from me. To pronounce the names in English now is from Afrikaans, so please excuse that from me. Reitsbou warlike nomads from the east and the south caused decreased the population and abandonment of many settlers in the area of southern Transjordan. Abram and his dependents migrate to the thinly populated hill country southwest of the Dead Sea. You saw the Dead Sea there. Okay. Abram in Canaan. I'm going to go with one down. That's that one. I can't not so fast. Bit back. Okay, that's just to show where Negev is actually situated. Negev is here, that's the Dead Sea. And we speak about the Negev in the text also. That's where the Dead Sea is lying here at the bottom, and here is the wilderness at the bottom. And there's Sinai. Okay, so here, this is the Saudi Arabian desert. Here at the bottom, you've got the Dead Sea is Negev. We also speak about in the text. Okay. Abraham and Canaan. Abram. At the time of Abram's migration to Palestine, the hilly region of the central Palestine were heavily forested. Therefore, little of the land was cultivated. Abram lived in the southern part of Palestine in the region known as Negev. That is where what I just mentioned there. The word has been translated the south, but the Hebrew term Negev actually means dry. The area of Abram's wanderings received from 10 to 20 inches of rainfall each year and was suitable for sheep. Abram passed through the land towards the Negev, and while he camped at Shechem, the central Canaan, he was promised that his descendants should be given the land. That was in Genesis 12 verse 7. He camped in the mountain east of Bethel and west of Ai and journeyed on towards Negev. Now, that is the mountain area, just what I showed you there. That was, you can actually see here, they show on the map the mountain area, but it's running right through there. There is they say that is a mountain area, Samaria, but you can actually see with the graphic there, that is mountain areas. All around there. Okay, I can go one down. No, not two. Not one. There we go. After the return from Egypt, he dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron. You see, now you've got the wilderness, as we had in the wilderness of Judea. It's just more zoom in. The Dead Sea, there you've got Hebron. Wilderness of Judea. There. It's actually very nice. There you can see that's all made up. That is all mountains and so on. That's it. There's the Judean hills. It's actually very nice if you look at it. Hebron was founded after the days of Abram. Genesis 14 describes the invasion of Canaan by the alliance of the king from Mesopotamia. Evidence recovered from ancient Agharat, Sharma, shows that the Rephaims, Genesis 14 verse 5, lived in, that was a one too fast, lived in Syria and in a region to the east and south of the Dead Sea prior to the 15th century before Christ. The Rephaim, Zuzim and Emim formed part of the pre-Israelite population of Palestine. There we go. Now, Sodom and Gomorrah. Everybody knows about Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah were cities in a plain which bordered the Dead Sea. Very interesting. Those Sodom and Gomorrah was actually cities, the people stayed. We know there was people.
Yeah.
And the Dead Sea was a real, there was water.
Mm.
It was a real water, it wasn't salt like it's now. There was water and there was bushes and everything. So there was people. They stayed beside people.
Okay.
But again, because of the place that shifted, after God had the sulfur coming from heaven, what was it? As we had in chapter 2, we looked at it. It was actually an eruption of a volcano.
Yeah.
And God used natural forces to do what He did. The Dead Sea. Sodom and Gomorrah were cities in the plain which border the Dead Sea. The 5 cities of the plain were so important that Chedorlaomer, whatever the king is, king of Elam, conquered them and levied on them an annual tribute. When they refused to pay, he came with his allied forces and subdued the city-states of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboiim, and Bela. They were all around there. After plundering the cities, the invaders returned home. Hebron and his Amorite confederates overtook them and Habor, I don't know how you pronounce it, and recovered the spoil which had been confiscated. The invading of Mesopotamians had followed a well-established trade route which extended as far south of Ezion-Geber at the head of the Gulf of Ahab. The road later became known as the King's Highway in Numbers 20 verse 17. The Mesopotamian kings were interested in the plain of the Dead Sea because of copper, asphalt, magnesia and other materials deposited there. Now you can think about it, all of the things that came with the volcano, they can get there now. Let's just go one down. Okay, we same place. Now, go to the next one. That's a Gulf of Ahab that we spoke about, the Red Sea. Right? We spoke about the Ahab of the Gulf just now. Okay. So it's right where the Red Sea is on top of the Red Sea. The two places is going out. So it's right on top. The date of the patriarchs. Archbishop Usher in the 17th century set the date 1969 before Christ for Abraham's birth and 1728 before Christ for Joseph's descent to Egypt. He based the calculations of Exodus 12:40, which allows 430 years for the Israelites sojourn to Egypt, and according to the Septuagint, the 430 years included the patriarch sojourn in Canaan as well as a period of 250 years. That is in Genesis 12 verse 4, 21 verse 5, 25, 26, 47 verse 9. Abraham's presence in Canaan is shortly after 200 before Christ. He was chieftain of the Sizebel clan, which originally was located in the vicinity of Ur and the Chaldeans, and later in the plain of Abram near Haran. Near Haran. He and his people normally were peaceful herdsmen who occupied the unsettled area, primarily in the southern and central mountain range of Palestine and in Egypt, in search of the seasonal pasture of the flocks. Now you can have a more or less idea, if I give the names, where it lies. You know more or less what I'm talking about. The Habiru, with whom the name Hebrew has been associated, would fight if provoked, and the association demanded it. Such as the incident in which the invading king slew Lot and his goods, in Genesis 14 verse 1 to 16. The Habiru referred to a foreign person who gained economic security in a society by hiring themselves out as slaves, either to wealthy persons or to government authorities. Remember, we dealt also with that in chapter 2. We also spoke about it. It depended that they were aggressive persons who often preyed on communities and ambushed small caravans. Customs and patriarchs. Okay, now we go a bit down, more down. Oops, no, that was too far. And that's too. There we go. Many of the Nazi texts record adoption policies. The Hurrian law prohibited the direct sale of land, therefore its transfer was inheritance. Often the owners of land was transferred under the guise of adoption. And listen very carefully to this one. In which slaves were made the heirs of landowners. In the case of childless couples, the genuine adoption of a son was normal. The adoption son was expected to take care of his parents during their old age and to give them respectable burials. God promised Abram that Eliezer would not be his heir. Remember, he had the one child that he adopted. Before he adopted Eliezer and he thought that is now his child. And God said, no, it's not your child. But Abram will beget a natural son in Genesis 15 verse 4. Remember, God said to him, it will not be your son. Now listen what exactly happened there. As Lucy, a marriage contract obligated a childless wife to provide her husband with a slave to bear children for her. That was now the son. Remember? If a son was born to the slave, the wife was entitled to treat the concubine offspring as her own. In Genesis 16 verse 2, Nazi was provided that the son of the slave woman who had become higher would like second place if the son later was born to the wife. So Isaac and Ishmael. Okay? However, the son of the slave woman, Ishmael, was not to be cast out, but was a share in the inheritance. That was supposed to be. That was. Ishmael was by Nazi law Abraham's true heir until Isaac was born. Then Ishmael to the second place, but was not to be cast out. The law explains why Abraham was apprehensive about Sarah's expelling Hagar and Ishmael after the latter had mocked Isaac on the day of his weaning feast in Genesis 21 verse 11. That's why it was so difficult to do it. Because he was actually part of the hiring. That's why he also gave stuff to him and said, go. He didn't just, he gave him stuff and go. Okay. That's what happened. That was the Nazi law that was dealt with there. According to Nazi customs, birthright or title to the position of firstborn was negotiable among members of the family. One tablet tells of a man's disposing of his birthright by agreement. Jacob's taking advantage of, now listen, Esau, the Esau case. Jacob's taking advantage of Esau's hunger to gain the birthright was not unusual for Nazi culture. That is why Jacob said, okay, give me your part and then I will give you food. That was normal. Jacob was sent to his kinsman Laban to select a wife. When Jacob and Laban first met, Laban had no sons. The Nazi texts tell of a man adopting a son, giving him his daughters as wife, and establishing him as his heir. In the birth of a natural son occurred, he would become a particular heir, but the adoption son was to be allowed to share equal in inheritance with the natural son. The adopted son agreed not to enter into any additional marriage contracts. Otherwise, he would forfeit his right of the property. Jacob was accepted as an adopted son rather than a son-in-law, Genesis 29. Trouble arose between Jacob and Laban. Jacob decided to return the land of his father. Rachel and Leah implied that Laban's agreement with Jacob and his daughters was not being honored. For this in Genesis 31. Verse 151. For ye have sold us and had quit devoured also our money. For all the riches which God hath taken from our father, that is ours and our children's. So Laban may have been applied the Nazi law, which stipulated that the children born to an adopted son would not have any claim upon an estate if the natural son had been born after the adoption. The The maid wouldn't belong to the husband, but Laban appears to have maintained some claim to Jacob, Rachel, and Leah, indicating that Jacob occupied the position of a responsible son rather than a son-in-law. So what happened then? We know what happened with this, that they stole the god, that the little god that Rachel stole, remember? The household god. So the household god served as a title of property. Rachel, taking the gods of her father Laban, secured for her husband the right to property of Laban. The action removed the property rights from son of Laban, who were born after Jacob had been adopted as his son and had replaced him as legal heir. Therefore, Rachel's theft was an attempt to maintain the property, which had belonged previously to Jacob as rightful heir. Laban and Jacob entered into a contract with Jacob, would not take other wives besides the daughters of Laban, and would not return the claim, the inheritance of Laban's property, that we read in Genesis 21 verse 50 to 52. In return, Laban gave a legal release from filial duties to Jacob and his wives. God had promised the land of Canaan to Jacob as a descendant of Abram rather than the land of Aram as adopted son of Laban. Now you can understand what happened there. It makes a total another picture. You get total another picture of what happened there now. She didn't so much just steal it for one another, just stealing it. There was a reason why she stole it.
Yes.
Totally gives you another picture. That is why it's so important to know and to study the Bible and what is going on. Study why is that written? Why did she do it? So that is why we say keep the text in context.
In context,
what happened?
Yes.
By divine revelation, Jacob was instructed to return to Bethel and worship there. Genesis 35 verse 1. Members of the tribe still practiced the religious custom in Upper Mesopotamia, and they were instructed to destroy their foreign gods. Jacob's return to the land promised to Abram's descendants signified the re-establishment of Abrahamic covenant that we read in Genesis 12 verse 1 to 3, 15, 7 to 8, 35 verse 9 to 12. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Let's just quickly look there. When Abram arrived in Canaan, there were 5 flourishing cities in the plain of the southern end of the Dead Sea: Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah, Zor, and Zeboim. Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed by brimstone and fire, and is identified in Genesis 14 verse 3. The valley of Adim, which is now the Dead Sea, also called the Salt Sea. Okay. Sodom and Gomorrah is found. Do you know that? They found it?
Right.
Yes. Let's look at that.
Okay.
Let's look at that. That's the next one.
Interesting.
They found it. Where are we? Very interesting. This is not a new book, eh? This is not a new book.
Oh, it's not.
That's not a new book. You're going to look very long. It's not a new book. Okay. So, the author points to the burnt layer of Numaira, testifying the fairy destruction that overcome the city at the end of the EB third period as a Bab Edra, whatever you say it. There was evidence of a violent earthquake that occurred with the fire. The sites of Beth Edra, Hadra, and Numaira are located in the eastern fault line of the Jordan Rift Valley. Geologists theorize that an earthquake caused pressure on subterranean petroleum deposits, which were forced out of the ground, ignited, and fell back down the cities of the plain. And this is where they see the burn passes. There you can see the places. This is not the only picture. Let's go on. This is that was in papers, normal papers.
Yeah.
It was a biblical disaster. Ashen formation near Masada left, and sulfur balls below offered a silent warning. This was, as I said, it was they reckoned it was temples. 10 years have passed since archaeologist Ron White announced had discovered the ancient notes of made the impacts around the world. Sodom and Gomorrah and so on. It was a yellow sulfur that they got and so on. But this was actually their temples. So as the stuff it just burned like that.
Yeah.
As it came down. No, that was too fast. Very interesting. The Chalma House, 822, the center of Baal, this is a funny name. In the final phase of occupation on this funny name, the dead were entered in a mud brick building called Cardinal House. The dead was just like that, they died. 5 examples were excavated, and in each case they were destroyed by fire at the same time the city was destroyed. Careful stratigraphic excavation and Camel House 822 shown here, the larger of those excavated, revealed that the fire started in the roof and spread in the interior when the roof collapsed. So it came from top, it collapsed. This provides evidence, powerful evidence the Lord raining down burnt sulfur and Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heaven. It just came down, Genesis 19 verse 24. So it came on and it just burned up. The dead bodies is there. Now, then the Lord rained down burnt sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. That said, overthrow the cities, Genesis 19:24 all across the site of this funny name. Archaeologists found evidence of the fairy destruction, such as the layers of ash in the Western Temple. Tumble walls attested to the earthquake as well. There you can see the temple walls and stuff that they had there. And there you can see this is the for further temple walls outside. Come on. There you can also see the temple walls. There you can see the layers of the outlaid temples at Gomorrah, how the structures was. There you can see the temple tops and things. That's the far. And as they open up the stuff, as open there you can see the buildings.
Okay, yeah.
You can see there was big buildings there. There, as they open up, you can see the stuff there. That's not all. That is the salt. That was the coast. Sodom was by the salt, by the salt sea. There was water. That's the salt. That's what it looked like after they came down. That's where the salt sea is now there. So yeah, that's what happened. So Nazi. So yeah, there's proof. They got it. They found it. They opened it up. So it's there. So this is not in your book. The 4. Egypt and deliverance. Are you ready for the next one?
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Egyptian bondage and deliverance. It is pointed out that the land of Egypt is a gift of the Nile. Little or no rainfall waters in the northeastern Africa desert country, and only the life-giving waters of the Nile make life possible along the shores. The Nile is one of the world's longest rivers, following 4,187 miles from its origin in the interior of Africa. The blue and the white Niles come together in modern Khartoum. Now, okay, you're going back to, going back, okay. You're going here, the bottom one. I don't want to talk to you. Another one. There we go. There Niles is coming down, the whole Nile. There's the blue Nile. There's the white Nile. And there they're coming together. Now what's interesting is that one. At the moment, I wonder if that's the next one. No, it's not the next one. Yes, it is it? Yes.
Yeah.
Now at the moment, I think there's only 2 or 3 more Nile points that's going out into the Mediterranean. There was a lot in the biblical time.
Okay.
There's not a lot like that anymore. There's just a few going out. Again with the shifting of the plates. What? Tectonic plates, then? Okay. So it's not so much anymore. So it's quite interesting how our land, our whole world changed already from that time.
True.
The biblical times, the Nile emptied into the Mediterranean Sea with 5 branches. But today only 2 branches flow through the delta. It's quite a lot, eh?
Yeah.
There were 5 branches, only 2 go through the delta. Areas around the Nile with harder stone account for 6 cataracts. Egypt lay north of the first cataract. Okay?
Yeah.
Right. There we see it. So, the system of lakes in the upper region of the Nile, as its sources, assures a steady flow of the river. Hymns of praises, the famous one known as the Adoration of the Nile, have served from the 19th dynasty, 1310 to 1200 before Christ, the time of the deliverance. During this celebration, the Nile god Hapi was pictured as bringing offerings of food and drink to other deities, symbolizing the abundance provided by the river. Yeah, but there we go. Go one up. That one. The historical summary of early Egypt. Periods of Egyptian history. The desert areas surrounding the Nile insulted Egypt from outside invasion through much of the history. From pre-Christian times, the history of the pharaohs from about 3000 before Christ to the conquest of Alexandria the Great in 332 before Christ was divided into 30 dynasties. After Greek conquest, Egypt was ruled by the Ptolemies until 30 before Christ. Another scheme of dividing Egyptian history is as follows. The Old Kingdom of Pyramid Age, 3rd through 6th dynasties, about 2700 to 2200 before Christ. The first intermediate period, 200 to 2000 before Christ. The Middle Kingdom, chiefly the 20th dynasty, about 2000 to 1800 before Christ. The second intermediate period, about 1800 to 1570 before Christ, which indicates the Hyksos period of 1710 to 1550 before Christ. The New Kingdom of Empire, 18th through 20th dynasty, from 1570 to 1090 before Christ, which includes the Amarna period and Exodus, that's the important one. The period of weakness about 1090 to 700 before Christ. The Ethiopian and Saitic period about 700 to 525 before Christ. The Persian, Ptolemaic and the Roman periods about 525 before Christ to 70 AD. What happened in 70 AD? Can you tell me? What was the story?
Okay.
Rock hatches and flint implements indicated that the area was inhabited during the Old Stone Age. Development caused permanent villages communities to establish. Increasing population forced the use of new techniques to gain more available land. Marshes were drained and an extensive system of irrigation was developed that allows cultivation of land further from the Nile. The animal-drawn plough began to be used, and the art of brick making and the use of cylinder seals for rolling impressions on wet clay were imported from Mesopotamia. Let's just get this next one. The first dynasty was established about 3000 before Christ by Menes and Tenes, who sorry if I laughed now. Menes and Tenes. Sorry, I started laughing. I just couldn't help it, but we start again. The first dynasty was established in 3000 before Christ by Menes of Tenes, who brought the two states of Upper and Lower Egypt under one rule. Menes moved his capital from Tenes to a more central location at Memphis, near the epics of the Nile Delta. His conquest coincided with the first written records, the development of sculpture and architecture, the mining of copper, and the development of metallurgy. The period marked the beginning of history and civilization in Egypt. It's just the lower Egypt and the upper Egypt and the Nile and everything there that it showed again there. At the time of the cult of Ra, the sun god, whose worship centered in Heliopolis, was popular in Lower Egypt. Just for interest's sake, what do you see there? What we see today a lot in the social media and things running around. Now come back, go up again. What do you see there? What you see in today's social media a lot?
Social media a lot. I think the eye.
The eye.
Yeah.
The eye. That eye is all over. All over.
Yeah.
And what is this? The sun god Ra. What is that? You see that all over, and the people is actually wearing it around their necks, thinking of that is the cross. What is that? That's the sun god Ra.
Okay.
It's not a Christian symbol.
Yeah.
They got it in his hand.
Yes.
That's the sun god. There's the one. Also, it's the sun god Ra. It's not a Christian symbol.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
You people must have a look at things like that. Go into these things and look at it. It's not a Christian symbol. There's 3 of them. That eye is not a Christian symbol. There's the eye.
Yeah.
Look at this. This thing also comes up a lot of times. It's not Christian symbols. That is the sun god Ra. You're wearing around your neck, wearing around your arms, wearing wherever you go. Please, people, look at that. Other cosmetic deities came from him, and these gods gave birth to the gods of the Egyptian pantheon, such as Isis, Set, Osiris, and Nephthys. Now let's go a bit further. Go on. Where are you? There. Now, there you see it again. You know that Isis is again in our land, eh?
Yeah.
Isis, what are they doing there? It's not a Christian symbol. All of them wearing that. Both of them. What is that? People look at what that symbols are. What is that face? Look at that symbol. Look at that type of eyes. Look what they've got on their heads. It's not, look this. Look what's the stripes. It's not Christian stuff. Look at the things. Can we go a bit lower, the other gods? There's Osiris, Nephthys. There's that hook thing. This is not, look at this type of thing they wear on top of their heads. Look at the things. It's not Christian symbols.
Yeah.
There's that duck with the, there's the wings. Be careful what you do. You push God away. The satanic stuff you're wearing is not Christian stuff. You invite evil spirits towards you. People, be careful.
Yeah, true.
Be careful. And that's a warning.
Yeah, true.
Okay? The beliefs of the religion involved to the point of proclaiming that the Pharaoh was the son of Ra, or even the son God himself. Eventually, the Pharaoh became involved as a representative of a daily purification ritual, which the sun was believed to undergo. The Pharaoh was considered to be a god during the time of the 10 plagues. Listen to this. That Pharaoh thought he was a god. That is why he dared God. There was actually a contest between God, Pharaoh, and the God of Moses, because the Pharaoh was now God. And Moses, whose name was Yahweh. Along with the cult of Ra, or Re, it's the same God, developed the cult of God Thor. We know about Thor, son of the falcon deity Horus. Here we go again. There's Horus. Now we go first for Thor. Yes, with Thor. We go there. This flicks that we look at Thor. Remember? Go Netflix. Come on. Now there we go. Thor. Look at that symbols. Look at that symbols, people. Look there. Look at that symbols. Thor. Look at that. Look at that. Look at that. It's Thor. Look at that. There's holding that. It's not a Christian cross. It's not a Christian cross. It's Satan. It's satanic stuff. Look at that. There we got it again. Look at this. It's a spade with a cross type of thing. The snake thing. Look at these symbols. It's not Christian stuff. Look at it. It's not Christian stuff. People, look at the stuff. There's the cross. That stuff again is holding it. Look what it is holding on to. Thing on the head. Please. It's coming from the godhead, the god Horus. Satanic stuff. It's not what I'm saying, it's what it's there. It's in the Bible, like you call it, there's it.
Yeah.
The god Horus. Satanic stuff. The third religious cult rose in Memphis, and took Thoth as the supreme god. He is identified as the great cosmic mind and first cause who produced the world and its contents of the projection of his thoughts. This is biblical stuff. It's in the Bible. And it's born. We are born. It's not stuff I'm putting out my thumb. This is in the Bible. God thumb. Again, there. You got your God thumb. This things are wearing. Look this thing with the two pegs at the bottom. Look this thing in front of him. The snake.
And the beard.
And the beard, yeah. And the snake. Look at him. It's nothing I'm saying. That is what the Bible is saying. That's what it looked like. That's what they did. The satanic stuff. Egypt had several different multitudes of gods by the time of Abraham. Multitude of different gods of their own. It's shocking, huh?
Yeah, it is.
Shocking. The Old Kingdom, 27,000 to 22,000 before, 2700 to 2200 before Christ. The Old Kingdom period begins with the Third Dynasty, about 2700 before Christ. The Step Pyramid, the Joshua, belongs to this period. Now, quite interesting. They found that too.
Yeah.
Step Pyramid.
Wow.
Okay, go down. It's nice to see what they did. Then they go into the pyramid. All the stuff that we got. It's quite interesting to see all the things they found and all of that. Let's see. The work is attributed to Imhotep, who was a magician, priest, architect, physician, and sage. He designed the pyramid as a terraced mausoleum, a tomb, as a tomb to be constructed out of hewn stone. The pyramid was erected to a height of nearly 200 feet. The king, as a god, was assured of eternal life. Now, can you go in there and see if that king is still alive in there? And he did. And, sorry?
This mausoleum thing.
Yeah, the terraced mausoleum. It's a tomb, yeah.
They did it for this guy. What's his name?
That was the king.
Recently, they did it also in Brazil for what is this footballer? Pele.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did it for him. The mausoleum.
And they don't live there. Oh, no, they're still there.
Yeah.
assured for eternal life and needed an enduring court for an eternal rule of the next world. Right. The fourth dynasty, 2650 and 2500 before Christ, constructed the third pyramid of Giza. I think we did this also in the second this discussion of the second chapter, didn't we?
Yeah, just a bit. Yeah.
The largest was the Great Pyramid, and it was built as a tomb of Khufu, a structure covering 30 acres of land and requiring 30 years and unbelievable resources to construct, that 30 years to build. Can you believe it? The second pyramid was built for Khafre, near of the famous Phoenix, which is associated with Khafre. The third Phoenix was built for Menkure. The pyramids were built long before Abraham. This I didn't bring up again because it is discussed everything in chapter 2.
Oh yeah, okay.
From the 5th dynasty, 2500 to 2350 before Christ, inscriptions describe judgment and eternal joy and are known as the pyramid texts. They contains an assorted and magical spells, incantations, hymns and prayers which were provided for the use of deceased kings, and he stood before the judgment seat of Osiris, a god who had died but who continued to live and rule in another realm. Yeah, Satan definitely ruled in another realm, eh? Right. The first intermediate period, the rule of the ineffective kings of the 6th dynasty resulted in the disintegration of the old kingdom and a period of social upheaval. Political intrigue became prominent as ambitious men sought power and attainment of their material desires. Foreign trade filtered tombs of the pharaohs were robbed, and ascetic producers infiltrated the Delta region. I think they got a lot of gold and everything there with that robberies. Two construction forces emerged during the first intermediate period, namely a reconstruction that confidence in materialism was inadequate and development of the sense of social justice. These developments took place just prior to the time of Abram. The Middle Kingdom, about 2000 to 1800 before Christ. In the Old Kingdom, Memphis in Lower Egypt had been the center of political power. Prior to 2000 before Christ, competition arose between the rulers of Heracleopolis, which represented the political tradition of Memphis, and of Thebes of Upper Egypt. Victory by leaders of Upper Egypt reunited the country and brought peace and stability to the entire land. 20th dynasty, 1990 to 1780 before Christ, development new political and social structures along feudalistic, added new territory by expanding into Nubia, utilized the mineral wealth of the Sinai Peninsula and gained new agricultural land by improving irrigation systems. The frontier fortress was developed above the second cataract. The Middle Kingdom existed during the time of Abram and Isaac and possible when Joseph entered Egypt. Documents known as execration texts, which dated about 1850 before Christ, have been uncovered. These texts contain magical formulas for cursing and confusing the king's enemies. Witchcraft and sorcery practiced in Egypt, as given as Exodus 7 verse 11, were prohibited in Israel. Exodus 22 verse 18 and Deuteronomy 18 verse 10. And this is still happening. All this witchcraft and things is still happening. The influence of the 12th dynasty reached into Canaan as far as Shechem with the invasion of Sesostris III, 1887 to 1849 before Christ. The second intermediate period, 1800 to 1570. The Egyptian state began to disintegrate with competing dynasties at Thebes and in the Delta area. During internal strife, Egypt was confronted by the threat of foreign invasion. By 1720 before Christ, the Hyksos, who used horse-drawn chariots, had become the dominators in Egypt, that they gained political control. The center of their strength was at Havaris, Tanis, in the Delta region. They appear to have been a mixture of Semitic Assyrian stock and may have included some Haberu. That's not a Hebrew sort of thing. Eh? The name Hyksos in Egypt means chiefs of foreign lands. He records information provided by the early historian Manethu, 2018 before Christ, that the Hyksos overpowered Egypt by numbers rather than military force. They burned cities, demolished temples, and treated the inhabitants in a hostile manner. A stela designed at the year 400, which has been recovered in Tanis, Avaris, probably was erected by an order by Ramesses II, 2019 to 1924 before Christ, to commemorate the 400th anniversary of the founding of Avaris. There you see, that's that one. The one is showing all the time on the screen. That is that one. Okay, that's that one. With the uncertainty of dates because of the disagreement of the Greek and Hebrew texts, it seems more reasonable to place Jacob's entrance into Egypt during the rule of the Hyksos about or before 1700 before Christ, with Joseph's entrance precede him several years. Right. The New Kingdom of Empire, 1570 to 1019 before Christ. While the Hyksos ruled the Delta area in Lower Egypt, Theban kings continued a degree of control in Upper Egypt. King Kamos, about 1518 before Christ, decided to drive out the Ascetics to the north and the Nubians to the south. His successor, King Ahmose, 1570 to 1546 before Christ, expelled the Hyksos, reunited Egypt, and established the 18th dynasty, 1570 to 1310 before Christ. Egyptians occupied the old Hyksos Empire in Syria and Palestine. He reorganized his army and began to use the Assyrian bow and the horse-drawn chariots, giving his army superiority. He assumed the role of dictator, and the common people became servants who farmed the land for the royal owner. Thutmose II, in 1525-1494 before Christ, established firm control over the Egyptian provinces in Syria and Canaan. His daughter was Queen Hatshepsut. How would you say that? Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut, who ruled from about 1486 to 1468 before Christ. She adopted the title of king so that she might reign as a god. Hatshepsut was the princess who drew Moses out of the Nile River and adopted him as a son. Scholars today believe that Exodus took place nearer to 1300 before Christ. Hatshepsut devoted their energy to reconstruction, building enterprises, and peaceful foreign trade. She married her half-brother, who had a son by one of his concubines. The son, Thutmose III, 1490 to 1435 before Christ, became the next king. He had a special hatred for foreign rulers, and this hatred may have been expressed against the Semites who remain in the Delta region. The anti-foreign attitude of the Egyptians is reflected in Genesis 43 verse 32. The sons of Jacob were shepherds and thus were despised by the Egyptians. Genesis 46 verse 34. Thutmose III may have begun oppressive measures against the large Semitic population remaining in the Delta region in order to prevent the renewal of Hyksos or Shemitic rule, and that this policy may have been continued by his successors into the reign of Ramesses II. The Israelites were reduced to slavery and probably remained slaves for several generations.